Hi, I'm Megan Roberts. I lead the Early Intervention Research Group at Northwestern University, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about barriers and inequities, specifically in early intervention for children, for Black children and other children of color. I will say that I have been avoiding making this video because, just speaking honestly, I'm uncomfortable talking about some of these things. I'm worried I'm going to make a mistake. I'm worried I'm going to say the wrong word. But what I have come to realize over many months of self-reflection and self-study, I've realized that the worst thing I can do is be silent, and it's better to try my best, to think critically, to challenge myself, to be uncomfortable than it is to do the easy thing. So here we go. We've been reading a lot in our group about what this means for our group and how we can really do our part to combat systemic racism. And, you know, the nature of systemic racism is that it's everywhere and it's in early intervention, and that's the space that we live in. And so when we think about the early intervention process, starting from identification all the way to treatment, it really starts at the very beginning. We know that physicians are less likely to refer Black children for evaluations to see specialists. We know that Black children are more likely to be misdiagnosed as having a behavioral disorder or conduct disorder. We know that kids living in poverty have less access to services. We know that families who might live in what we deem unsafe neighborhoods have trouble finding therapists and finding providers that are able to provide services that accommodate their specific needs and desires. And so because of all of that, it's really important for us to think critically about how we can start to solve some of these problems. And so therapy sessions, I wish I could say, are immune to kind of these biases and racism, but we're not. We're humans, right? And so part of this is really doing the work within ourselves to say, how can I de-bias? How can I work to be anti-racist? How can I think about how some of my practices might be racist? It doesn't, I mean, yes, it's likely that it's not intentional. Nevertheless, it might be there, and we have to start thinking critically about where those things are so that we can eliminate them to the best of our ability. And so how this manifests might be we might tell parents the right thing to do. Well, what is right? We don't really know. We might make judgments. I'll never forget, I was a new provider going on a home visit, and I saw this family had this huge big screen TV and no toys. And I was like, what are they doing? Why are they watching? Why are they spending all this money on this big TV and no toys? And that was the way they connected. They watched shows together. They watched family movies together. And who am I to say how they should spend their money or you know, that the TV is bad, right? Like I was bringing my own experience, my own upbringing into that, and I was making a judgment on that family. And then also we bring in outside materials. There's nothing. Well, there's lots of things that are hard. One big hard thing is when you bring in this magical toy and the kid talks for the toy, but then you take the toy away and then the parent doesn't have the toy. How hard must that be? What if a family can't afford that toy? And then there's that guilt potentially of like, oh my gosh, maybe I need to buy that toy. Well, do you really need to buy that toy? Or could we have made use of some things in the environment? Some things we can actively do, right? So that's the problem, but there's some solutions that we can do. The family-centered practice, the coaching model, is a great way to look at every family as an individual. You're building on that family's strengths, and you're supporting that family to grow and empowering that family to use the skills and resources they have access to help support their child. And so this is, by teaching caregivers strategies, you're empowering them to be able to teach their child rather than just relying on you. We like the eco map. So an eco map is really seeking understanding about a family's dynamic, what supports they have. For example, siblings might interfere or they might be supportive, but every family is different. We also really like the routines-based interview. So that is a nice conversation, a context in which you can start to go through the family's day, kind of at that micro level. So, you know, what is the first thing you do, and all the little baby steps within that routine to really start to understand what might be good context to try out some intervention strategies. We also really want to support reflection and problem solving. So we want to ask families about their current approach to doing things before jumping in and giving advice. And so, for example, you might say, I noticed that he threw that cup when he got upset. What do you think about that? How does he normally respond? You know, what's been working for you? Tell me more. I wonder what would happen if, you know, and so then it's rather than you sort of being like, well, I think you should do X, Y, and Z, really trying to seek understanding, which goes along with the next, I would say tip would be to really avoid assumptions. You know, cultural competence was the term back in the day. And now I think the term is cultural humility, right? Because nobody can be competent in someone's culture other than their own. That's unrealistic. And so really not making any assumptions about anything and really trying to seek understanding. I have found that if you bring your authentic self to a family and show genuine caring, that it's very hard to mess that up, right? I ask questions. So if I don't understand something, I'll never forget. I was working with this family and I made this mistake. There were 2 sinks and this family was kosher. And I was just like, why do you have 2 sinks? You know, and she's like, oh, this one's for this sink. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. You know, and she wasn't offended. And it showed her that I was genuinely interested in her culture and in this case, her religion. And it didn't bother her that I didn't know and then I asked her questions. And so the last thing I want to talk about is daycare settings. So sometimes we see kids in daycare and oftentimes those are families that are working, you know, during the day. And, sometimes that puts them in a disadvantage because they don't benefit from the one-on-one, coaching that we get for parents that we see in the home. And so it has things like, you know, kids that, you know, can stay home with a parent versus go to daycare are one of the sources of this big divide, right? In terms of what kids potentially have access to before school. And so I think it is really critical that we start to think about how we can systematically involve parents in early intervention, even when they don't see them. So yes, that is above and beyond. And yes, we have crazy caseloads and are driving from house to house. And it might seem like a lot to do one more thing, but I really want to challenge us all to start the conversation to say, how can we do this better particularly for families for whom we see their child in a daycare setting. So we might want to take video, ask if we can take videos and record them. We might want the parents to record videos and then we could look at them. I think there's lots of things we could start to think about, but my research experience has mainly been, you know, families in the home, but I think we really need to extend our service delivery model to think about how we can be really inclusive of all parents. The last thing I just want to say is it's really important to listen to people that don't always believe the same thing you believe, and also people that have different perspectives. I think it's important for us to kind of stretch how we conceptualize all the things in early intervention. And I think it's really important to hear all the voices, particularly people, Black SLPs and other SLPs of color. And I'm gonna somehow, I don't know how, put this information about the people that I follow that I have found to be really inspiring and thought-provoking and really pushed me to kind of up what I do and how I lead my group to be able to be part of this change, to think about how we can really start to tackle systemic racism in the sphere in which we work, which is early intervention. Thank you for listening.